everyone, welcome back to my channel where I'm telling stories from the imaginary world that I started when I was 9 years old and have been continuing now for over 20 years. In today's video, I'm going to be talking about the Chutasian calendar, more specifically the days of the week. And by telling you the origins of the days of the week, we can start learning a bit about the history of Chutasia. So as a recap for anyone who's new, Chutasia is the world that my stuffed toy hedgehog Chutney comes from, and Chutasia is filled with Chutasian hedgehogs. Chutasia consists of 11 islands, with the biggest in the centre being called Chutaland. And Chutaland is home to the royal family of Chutasia. And Chutney is the princess of Chutasia. Of course. So what I'm going to talk about is the origins of the Chutasian calendar. So in order to describe the origins, I'm going to have to introduce another island to you. This island is called Erizyco, or if we use the old spelling, it's spelled like this, but also pronounced Erizyco. And so the current era in the Chutasian calendar begins when a small number of hedgehogs from the island of Erizyco travel over to Chutaland. But these are no normal hedgehogs. These are great teachers, craftsmen, spiritual leaders, and they come over from Erizyco to Chutaland and they teach skills to the Chutalandian hedgehogs. We call them the Erizyco Mystomen, and everything in the Chutasian calendar is counted based on the number of years before the arrival of the Mystomen or the number of years after the arrival of the Mystomen. So, for example, Chutney was born in the year 158 AMA after Mystomen arrival, but if you wanted to talk about a date before, you would call it BMA, before Mystomen arrival. So before the arrival of the Erizyco Mystomen, there was what is called the inordinate times. And in the inordinate times, as far as we know so far, they were not really recording time or documenting events that happened in Chutaland. Let's talk about what was Chutaland like when the Erizyco Mystomen arrived. So Chutalandian society was quite primitive, at least in our understanding so far. But kind of groups of families had started to emerge in sort of family houses. And there were two kind of themes going on with the family houses. There were the rural houses, who lived in the countryside. They were very in touch with nature and spirituality, and they liked farming and understanding crops and plants and herbs. And then you had the other type of family house, which were known as the techno house. And they were far more interested in developing new technologies and sort of trades and crafts. And they had kind of started to gather a bit more in villages and what would eventually become towns. So you have these two types of families in Chutaland, and the Erizyco Mystomen taught both types. They had something to offer to both of them. To the techno houses, they taught them skills and crafts, and importantly, to the rural houses, they taught them about successfully planting and harvesting potatoes. Now, if you have watched any of the previous videos, you will know that potatoes are very important to the Chutasian hedgehogs. They absolutely love potatoes, like your favorite food. And eventually there's actually, when the potato crop has a problem, it actually leads to a war, which is called the War of the Potato. And I've covered that a bit in one of my previous videos. So this is a bit about how the potato crop arrived in Chutaland. So there's a bit of a disagreement from scholars. You know, they can't quite decide. Did the Erizyco Mystomen bring the potato with them, and that was how it was introduced into Chutaland? Or were the potatoes already there, and the Erizyco Mystomen just helped the locals to create better, more plentiful harvests of potatoes? And we don't quite know. But we do know that the Mystomen were quite pivotal in helping with the potatoes. And that's part of the reason why they give a calendar. So when we do the months of the year, which will be next time, I will talk a bit more about how those months of the year kind of guided the hedgehogs on when they should plant and harvest their potatoes. But for now, let's just focus on the days of the week. So I'm just going to glance at my notes and just check if I've covered everything so far. So what did the Mystomen do when they arrived in Chutaland? So they did teach and they taught, as I said, they taught both types of house, but they also integrated into the society and they married into the society. Oh, are you going to sit there? No, we'll put you here. All right. Oh, she's so cute. So the small group of Mystomen, or that we know of, married into both types of family, the rural and the techno. There was a bit of a rivalry beginning between the two types of houses, and the Mystomen did not want to make the, a fracture in the society deeper. But unfortunately, it did kind of have that impact. So the locals, it was really desirable to have a Mystomen marry into your family. It was a great honour. And to have one marry you, or to marry one of your children, and for your descendants to have the blood of the Mystomen was something really sought after. And I will talk in a couple of videos' time about how did the locals perceive these teachers, because some of them did see them as more kind of like God-like and not just teachers, and that's why they thought it was, really cool, really cool to be related to one. And so what does end up happening is that marriages are agreed based on whether you are of Mystomen descent. And it does kind of become a kind of like collectors type thing. Like when you would arrange a marriage, you'd want your children to be descendant from as many of the Mystomen as possible. Although not many managed to be descendant from all 5 that we know of who married into Chutalandian society. Of course, Chutney is descendant from all 5 of them. So since the marriage of Chutney's grandparents, the royal line have been able to trace their ancestry to 5 hedgehogs from Erizyco. So let's talk about how the calendar came about. Now, it doesn't seem that the Chutalandian calendar emerged organically. It looks a bit more like it was a sit-down job, like the Erizyco Mystomen kind of said, you need this calendar, let's make it. But they don't really know how long it took to develop the calendar. As they like to say, in Chutaland, we don't know how long it took to make the calendar because there was no calendar to measure how long it took. Wow, very good. So yeah, it was a bit of a sit-down job, and that always gives me the impression that the Erizyco Mystomen, I always feel like they came from a more advanced society, and maybe the end of an advanced society. Maybe they were the only surviving ones, and then they've travelled across to Chutaland to kind of pass on their knowledge and try to create a new society there. So I always feel like the Erizyco Mystomen, they probably had their own calendar, and maybe we'll learn more about that in the future. Chutney, perhaps? Maybe. So let's get on to the days of the week. There are 6 days of the week in the Chutalandian calendar. There are 10 months of the year, each with exactly 5 weeks in it. And so that means that each month has 30 days. And with 10 months, that means 300 days in a Chutasian year. It does seem a bit too perfect, and I do wonder perhaps, Chutney, if it is a bit perfect. And we'll talk about how successful the Chutasian calendar is in a couple videos time. I am looking at some notes here because I don't want to butcher this. So the first day of the week, My Day, is named after a female Mystomen who was called Midnighter. And Midnighter came across with her mother, who was called Skynighter. And so Skynighter, the second day of the week, which is called Kai Day, is named after Skynighter. So as I said before, the Erizyco Mystomen married into both the rural and the techno houses. And Mesechneiter did marry into the rural houses. She married a prominent leader in the rural communities and went on to have a daughter who was called Mesechneiter. And Mesechneiter actually ended up marrying the second king of Chutaland, who was called King Euilibert. And I will make a video about the kings and queens of Chutaland, and I will also make a video well, probably multiple videos showing the different family trees. So I'll try to keep it simple just for now. So King Euilibert chooses to marry Mesechneiter, partly, well, to make a point, because the royal family at that time was a sort of more like a techno house, and by marrying Mesechneiter from the rural houses, he was trying to make a statement that, you know, let's just kind of stop this rivalry. And he wanted to make a statement by marrying a girl, can we call them girls? A female hedgehog, a sow? No. By marrying a hedgehog from a rural house, the king was making a statement about putting an end to the rivalry. But also he was kind of also marrying her because she was descendant from Skyknighter and Midnighter, and that would be kind of cool if his children were descendant from multiple Mystomen. So you'll notice that the names Midnighter and Skyknighter both end with Nighter. And sometimes, depending on the region that hedgehogs are from in Chutaland, this is sometimes pronounced as Neater. So that would become Skykneiter or Midneater. And this eventually became the dominant pronunciation of this type of name. So you'll see the daughter of Midnighter, who is called Mesechneiter, also has this ending, Neater, but it's just spelled differently. And that's quite a common name ending for females in Chutaland. So you can kind of tell if a female is from Chutaland if their name ends in Neater. Of course, not all of them end in Neater, but a lot of the names do. For instance, Chutney. Chutney's name, her full name is actually Chutneiter, and that's where the ending comes from. Neater. It comes from Midnighter and Skyknighter. Yeah. So yeah, let's move on to the third day of the week, which is called Chutday. And Chutday is named after a Mystoman who was called Elvisnuff. And Elvisnuff, he did marry into the royal family, and his name, Elvisnuff, is passed down. And over time, a bit like the ending Neater, the name Elvisnuff becomes modernized until it eventually becomes Elvis. And some of you will know that Chutney's uncle is called Elvis. And so that's partly in memory of Elvisnuff, the Mystoman. So the fourth day of the week, I think we're on now, is called Chutday, and Chutday is named after the Mystoman who's called Silvertatus. So it's coming from Silvartatus, which again, I suppose some Chutasians were pronouncing it with a lot of a stronger R in it, so Silvartatus becomes Chutday. And so Silvertatus, let me just check, yes. So his great-great-grandson married into the royal families, and with his great-great-grandson, Granip Persnip Hoggersville, who marries Queen Slugata. And so Granip Persnip Hoggersville is Chutney's grandfather, and he's sometimes just called Grandfather Hog. There is also the hedgehog who is called Farmer Jaune Poppy. And if you have watched a previous video, you might remember Farmer Jaune Poppy, and he is the leader of a rebellious anti-monarchist group who are called the Urination. A bit more about that in the other videos. And so there is some rumours about the parentage of Farmer Jaune Poppy, and if the rumours are correct, then Farmer Jaune Poppy is a descendant of the Mystoman Silvertatus. So now we're on to number 5, the 5th day of the week, which is called Chutday. So far we're at My Day, Kai Day, Vis Day, Var Day, Chutday. And Weekday again is named after a Mystomen, and the Mystomen is called Atalarixus. So Atalarixus, as I'm reading just from my notes, because I cannot remember who everyone is, okay, right? So Atalarixus married the daughter of a prominent spiritual leader in the rural communities. Atalarixus, gosh, I wrote a lot here. Atalarixus is linked to the royal line through his granddaughters, who are called Beetelgrund and Erinhilda. So Beetelgrund, known as Beatty, was the childhood sweetheart of King Euilibert. Of course, I'll go over this again. But Beatty is the childhood sweetheart of King Euilibert, and they named their son Atalarixus. So they named their son Atalarixus in memory of the Mystomen, who was called Atalarixus. And eventually, when the younger Atalarixus becomes king, he is actually the king who unites all of Chutasia. So I believe he is the 4th king of Chutaland, but he is the 1st king of united Chutasia. And I'll cover this story in a lot more depth. So the name Weekday in the days of the week, it does originally come from the Mystomen Atalarixus, but it now has this second double meaning as remembering the king Atalarixus who united Chutasia under one monarchy. So now we're on to the last day of the week, which is also named after a king. So we have Chutday, 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 Weekday, and the last day, Spykday. And Spykday is named after King Spykebyrte. So King Spykebyrte, he was the prominent leader, sort of ruler at the time when the Erizyco Mystomen came to Chutaland. So there was a leader of Chutaland, but in his time he was not really called a king. He was never crowned, and he never called himself king. But when the Chutalandians look back at their history, they realize that really King Spykebyrte was really their king, and so they often call him King Spykebyrte, and he is considered the 1st king of Chutaland. So he is a very popular and loved historical figure. Although historical, I mean, it's not been that long. It's been like 170 years or something. So it's not that long ago. But King Spykebyrte is really loved by the Chutalandians, and he is remembered in the 6th day of the week. So King Spykebyrte, a bit more about him. He was a very on-the-ground kind of leader. So he really was a part of his community. He got his hands dirty, and he worked a lot with the Mystomen to really help create a society that is currently in Chutaland. So of course, as a king, Spykebyrte, and Chutney being a princess, King Spykebyrte is Chutney's 4 times great-grandfather. So her great-great-great-great-grandfather is King Spykebyrte. Do you hope someday that, one of the names of the week will be named after you? I'm sure she does. Which day should they change? You could call it Chutday. Which day should become Chutday? So we've got Chutday, 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 Weekday, Spykday. I don't know if Chutday would really fit. So this is the calendar which originated in Chutaland. There are calendars that exist, or dating systems that exist on the other islands in Chutasia. But when Chutasia became united as one, this became the kind of official dominant calendar. And so this is what's used primarily across Chutasia. So next time I'll talk about the months. And the months, again, they do relate to the Mystomen, but there's a bit more in there about the climates of Chutaland, the planting of potatoes in Chutaland, and some astronomy about the stars that can be seen at different times of the Chutalandian year. So if that video is available, it will be linked on the screen. Otherwise, subscribe so you'll get notified when that gets put up. We'll see you all in the next video.